After 9 years abroad, Caleb Whitaker returned to the Maine coast expecting to find his mother living comfortably in the cottage he had spent years paying to maintain. Instead, he found Elaine Whitaker sleeping inside an old fishing hut behind a shuttered marina, wrapped in worn blankets beside a kerosene heater that barely worked. The shock wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the leaking roof or the cold. It was the way she looked over her shoulder when she saw him and whispered, "Don't let Martin know you're here." In that moment, Caleb realized something far worse than money had been stolen from his family. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 days earlier, Caleb still believed money had kept his family safe. At 44, Caleb Whitaker had built the kind of life most people dreamed about. He spent nearly a decade in Singapore, working as a naval architect, designing commercial vessels for some of the largest shipping companies in the world. His apartment overlooked the harbor. His income had grown beyond anything he imagined when he first left Maine. Whenever guilt crept in, he reminded himself that he was taking care of his family. Every month, without fail, he sent money home. Repairs, medical expenses, property taxes, anything his mother needed. His older brother Martin handled the details locally. That arrangement had always seemed practical. Caleb was thousands of miles away. Martin lived nearby. It made sense. At least, that was what Caleb believed. The flight home felt different this time. He wasn't returning for a holiday or a rushed visit squeezed between projects. He had finally taken several weeks off. He wanted to surprise Elaine. He imagined her standing on the porch of the little coastal cottage overlooking the water. He imagined the hug, the laughter, the stories they would catch up on. The rental SUV rolled through familiar roads lined with pine trees and salt-stained fences. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. The ocean appeared beyond the hills. For the first time in years, Caleb felt like he was coming home. When he reached the cottage, he slowed. Then he frowned. Something felt wrong immediately. The house looked freshly painted. The shutters were new. Flower boxes sat beneath the windows. A truck he didn't recognize was parked in the driveway. Caleb pulled over. For several seconds he simply stared. Then a woman he'd never seen stepped out onto the porch. She waved politely. "Can I help you?" Caleb's stomach tightened. "I'm looking for Elaine Whitaker." The woman's smile disappeared. "Oh." A pause. "You must be family." The words hit strangely. "Where is she?" The woman glanced toward the neighboring property. "We bought this place about 2 years ago." Bought. Caleb felt his pulse quicken. "I'm sorry," he said. "Bought it from who?" The woman hesitated. "I thought you knew." He didn't. Not even a little. 20 minutes later, Caleb stood beside the harbor talking to a retired dock worker named Frank Donovan. Frank had known the Whitakers for decades. The older man looked uncomfortable from the moment Caleb introduced himself. "Your mother never wanted anyone bothering you," Frank said quietly. "What happened to her house?" Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "That's a long story. I've got time." The old man looked toward the abandoned marina at the far end of the harbor. Weather-beaten buildings sat empty behind rustic fences. Then Frank pointed. "She's back there." Caleb followed the direction of his finger. "Back where?" Frank's expression darkened. "Behind the marina." The drive took less than 5 minutes. The shock lasted much longer. The marina looked abandoned. Broken signs hung crookedly from old wooden posts. Fishing equipment rusted beside empty docks. Several buildings had plywood nailed over their windows, and tucked behind the largest warehouse sat a structure Caleb almost missed. A fishing hut, small, crooked, patched together from mismatched boards and faded tarps. For a moment he told himself it couldn't be. Then the door opened. Elaine Whitaker stepped outside. Her hair had gone almost completely silver. Her coat hung loosely from her shoulders. Her hands were covered by cracked work gloves. She looked older than her 72 years. Much older. The bucket she was carrying slipped from her grasp. It hit the ground with a dull thud. Neither of them moved. Then Caleb crossed the distance between them in seconds. "Mom." Her eyes filled with tears. "Caleb." He wrapped his arms around her. She felt frighteningly thin. The kind of thin that came from years of getting by instead of living. When he finally stepped back, he looked at the hut. A narrow cot was visible through the doorway. Stacks of canned food sat against one wall. A kerosene heater occupied a corner. Nothing about it looked temporary. Nothing about it looked recent. "Mom," he asked softly, "why are you living here?" Elaine's eyes immediately shifted away from him, toward the harbor road, toward town, toward something Caleb couldn't see. Fear crossed her face, real fear. Then she grabbed his arm, not gently. "Des, please," she whispered. "Don't tell Martin you're here." Caleb stared at her. The words made no sense. "Martin?" She nodded, her hands trembled. Inside the hut, she quickly shut the door behind them. The space smelled of saltwater, damp wood, and kerosene. Everything inside was organized with painful care. A cot, a folding chair, a tiny table, and beneath that table sat an old metal tackle box. Elaine knelt slowly and pulled it toward her. For several seconds she simply stared at it. Then she opened the lid. Inside were yellowed documents, envelopes, and neatly folded papers. When she looked back at Caleb, tears filled her eyes. "He didn't just take the house, Caleb." She pulled one document from the stack. Her voice broke. "He took your name off something your father left you." Caleb stared at the paper in his mother's trembling hands. The fishing hut suddenly felt even smaller. Outside, gulls cried somewhere over the harbor. The wind rattled loose boards along the marina. But inside the hut, everything seemed strangely quiet. "What do you mean he took my name off something?" Caleb asked. Elaine looked down at the document. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether she should continue. Then she folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. "We shouldn't talk about it here." The answer only deepened the knot forming in Caleb's chest. "Mom," she met his eyes. "I know how that sounds. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds like somebody stole something." Her face tightened. Maybe they did. Caleb leaned back in the folding chair and looked around the hut again. The narrow cot, the canned soup stacked against the wall, the patched curtains, the kerosene heater. Nothing about this made sense. For years he had sent money home. Not small amounts, thousands of dollars, sometimes more. Whenever Martin called and mentioned repairs, medical bills, rising taxes, or unexpected expenses, Caleb sent whatever was needed. He had never hesitated, because family was family, and because Martin always sounded responsible, reliable, helpful. The brother who stayed, the brother who handled things. Now Caleb was sitting inside a fishing hut while his mother wore gloves patched with duct tape. Something wasn't adding up. "When did you leave the cottage?" he asked. Elaine hesitated. "About 2 years ago." 2 years. The number hit him hard. He had spoken to Martin dozens of times during those 2 years. Not once had Martin mentioned it. "Why didn't you call me?" Elaine gave a sad smile. "I tried." Caleb frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked away. "I wrote." The answer landed strangely. "Wrote what?" "Letters." "Letters?" Her eyes glistened. "Lots of them." A heavy silence settled between them. Caleb felt the first real crack in the version of reality he had carried for years. "You wrote me letters." Elaine nodded. "And you never got them." Before he could respond, a truck engine sounded outside. Elaine immediately froze. The reaction was instant. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the small window. Fear, raw fear. Caleb noticed it immediately. The truck rolled past the marina entrance and continued down the road. Only after the sound disappeared did she relax. The moment lasted only seconds, but Caleb had seen enough. His mother wasn't merely struggling, she was afraid, and afraid of someone specific. "Is it Martin?" he asked quietly. Elaine didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. An hour later, Caleb drove into town. He needed air, he needed perspective. Most of all, he needed information. The harbor district looked wealthier than he remembered. New restaurants lined the waterfront. Tourist shops occupied old warehouses. Several buildings had been renovated. The town was growing, yet somehow Elaine had ended up behind an abandoned marina. Caleb parked near the docks and walked. People recognized the Whitaker name. Several recognized him. Most seemed surprised he was back. A few looked uncomfortable when he asked about Elaine. That bothered him. Eventually, he found himself standing outside Harbor View Marina, the largest marina in town. Fresh paint, new signage, expensive boats, a bustling office. Then he noticed the name on the entrance plaque, Martin Whitaker, owner. Caleb stood there for several seconds. He remembered when the marina was little more than a struggling family business. Now it looked successful, very successful. A woman in business attire stepped outside carrying paperwork. She smiled professionally. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Martin." Recognition flashed across her face. You must be Caleb. That surprised him. You know who I am? Of course. She extended a hand. Serena Whitaker, Martin's wife. Caleb shook it. Serena looked polished and confident. Everything about her projected stability, success, the exact opposite of what he had just left behind at the fishing hut. Martin's meeting with investors, she said. He'll be back shortly. Investors, the word echoed in Caleb's mind. His mother lived in a hut. His brother had investors. Something about that contrast felt ugly. Serena studied him carefully. Sure, you surprised everyone coming back? So I've noticed. She laughed softly. Martin always said you were impossible to pin down. Caleb didn't smile. And he always said everything was fine back home. The atmosphere shifted slightly. Only slightly, but he noticed. Serena crossed her arms. Family situations are complicated. That's one way to put it. Her smile became tighter. Elaine can be difficult sometimes. The words landed wrong. Very wrong. How so? Serena looked toward the marina office. As people get older, they make choices we don't always understand. Caleb felt irritation rising. My mother is living in a fishing hut. Serena's expression remained calm. That was her decision. Caleb almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. No one voluntarily traded a paid-for cottage for a leaking shack behind an abandoned marina. Before he could respond, a black SUV pulled into the lot. The driver's door opened. Martin stepped out. For a second, neither brother moved. 9 years suddenly felt much shorter. Martin looked older, broader, more polished than Caleb remembered. The expensive watch helped. The tailored jacket helped too. He looked successful, very successful. Then Martin saw him. Surprise flashed across his face. Gone almost immediately. Caleb. His voice was controlled, measured, not warm, not cold, just careful. Martin. Several long seconds passed. Then Martin smiled. A smile that never reached his eyes. You should have called first. Caleb looked directly at him. So should you. The smile faded. Serena quietly stepped away. Neither brother noticed. Martin slipped both hands into his pockets. What does that mean? Caleb took one step closer. My mother lives in a fishing hut. The silence that followed felt heavy. Martin's expression didn't change, not even slightly. Instead, he sighed, as if he had expected this conversation eventually. Elaine made her own choices. The words immediately made Caleb angry. Really? Yes, you expect me to believe that. Martin's eyes hardened. You've been gone a long time. I've been sending money, and money isn't the same as being here. The statement hit harder than Caleb expected, because part of it was true. Martin saw it, saw the reaction and pressed forward. You left. Cale worked. You disappeared. I called. You visited twice in 9 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. For the first time since arriving, guilt collided with anger. Both hurt. Both felt true. Martin stepped closer. Don't come back after nearly a decade and act like you're the only one who cares. The accusation hung between them. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to fire back, but something stopped him. Because despite everything, one question still mattered more than any other. What happened to the money? For the first time, Martin looked away, only briefly. But Caleb saw it, and that tiny hesitation told him more than any answer could. Then Martin smiled again, slowly, carefully, the smile of a man choosing his next move. The money went exactly where it needed to go. Caleb stared at him. Martin held the gaze. Neither brother spoke. Finally, Martin said something that made Caleb's blood run cold. If I were you, I'd be very careful about digging into old family business. Then he turned and walked toward the marina office, leaving Caleb standing alone in the parking lot, watching, thinking, wondering, and for the first time since arriving home, truly suspecting that whatever happened to Elaine had started long before the fishing hut. And whatever Martin was hiding, he was afraid Caleb might find it. Caleb barely remembered the drive back to the abandoned marina. Martin's warning stayed with him the entire way. If I were you, I'd be very careful about digging into old family business. The words sounded less like advice and more like a threat. By the time he parked beside the fishing hut, the sun was dropping toward the horizon. The harbor water reflected streaks of orange and gray. Seagulls circled overhead. The beauty of the coast felt almost cruel. Elaine was sitting outside on an overturned crate. She looked relieved when she saw him. For a second, Caleb wondered how many evenings she had spent alone here, how many sunsets she had watched from this spot while believing her younger son was too busy to come home. That thought hurt more than he expected. You were gone a while, she said. I saw Martin. The relief disappeared from face immediately. She lowered her eyes. What did he say? That you chose this. Elaine gave a short laugh. There was no humor in it. Of course he did. Caleb sat beside her. The harbor wind had grown colder. He noticed how tightly she pulled her coat around herself. Mom, he said quietly, when was the last time you slept somewhere warm? She didn't answer, and that answer was enough. That evening, Caleb drove into town and rented the nicest motel room available. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean, warm, safe. When he returned with the key card and the reservation information, Elaine refused before he finished explaining. No, Mom, no, you can't stay here. Her expression hardened. I can, you shouldn't. I have to. The firmness in her voice surprised him. For the first time since arriving, he saw the stubbornness that both Whitaker brothers had inherited. Why? Elaine looked toward the hut. The papers. What papers? The ones Martin never found. A chill moved through Caleb. She wasn't talking about sentimental keepsakes. She wasn't talking about photographs. She was talking about evidence. And apparently she had been protecting it for years. If I leave, she continued, someone could come while I'm gone. Who? She looked directly at him. You already know. Caleb did. He just didn't want to believe it. The conversation ended there. Neither of them won. An hour later, Caleb found himself spreading an extra blanket across the floor of the fishing hut. If Elaine wouldn't leave, he wasn't leaving either. The interior looked even smaller after dark. The kerosene heater gave off a faint smell. A single lantern provided most of the light. The cot belonged to Elaine. Caleb insisted on taking the floor. She argued. He ignored her. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. Not wiring money, not solving problems from overseas, simply being present. The wind picked up around midnight. By 1 a.m, rain was hammering the roof. The entire structure groaned. Water dripped through one corner into a bucket that Elaine had positioned with obvious experience. Plink, plink. The sound repeated steadily through the darkness. Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop imagining his mother enduring hundreds of nights like this, alone. When another gust shook the walls, he sat up. Elaine was awake too. Neither mentioned it. Neither needed to. The hut wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't a home, and the fact that she had survived here for so long filled him with equal parts admiration and guilt. Around 2 a.m, she finally spoke. Martin sent people once. Caleb turned toward her. What? They came with a truck. The lantern cast soft shadows across her face. They said they were cleaning up the property. What property? This one? The answer hit him hard. They tried to remove the hut? Elaine nodded. They thought I'd leave if they took enough things. Caleb sat upright. What things? My boxes, the papers, your father's belongings. His jaw tightened. What happened? I wouldn't let them. The simple answer carried enormous weight. He suddenly pictured his 72-year-old mother standing, alone in front of strangers, protecting what little she had left. Not because it was valuable, because it was hers, because nobody else would protect it. The rain continued pounding the roof. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Elaine quietly added something worse. After that, Martin stopped coming himself. The statement lingered in the darkness. Caleb understood what she wasn't saying. Distance, control, isolation. Sometimes neglect wasn't an accident. Sometimes it was a strategy. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally pulled him into sleep. The next morning, loud knocking woke them both, 3 sharp raps against the door. Caleb was on his feet immediately. A man in a reflective harbor authority jacket stood outside. Middle-aged, professional, uncomfortable. Morning, the man said. His eyes shifted from Caleb to Elaine, then back again. I need a signature. Elaine's shoulders slumped before he finished speaking. As though she already knew. The officer handed over an envelope. I'm sorry, those 2 words told Caleb everything. Elaine accepted the paper with trembling hands. The man lingered for a moment, then left. Neither spoke until his truck disappeared down the road. Finally, Caleb took the envelope. Official county markings covered the front. His stomach tightened. He opened it carefully. The notice was straightforward. The structure was being classified as unsafe occupancy. The marina property owner had requested enforcement. The occupant had 7 days to vacate. 7 days. Caleb looked up. Elaine wasn't surprised. She wasn't even angry. She simply looked tired. Martin? He asked. She nodded slowly. I think so. The realization hit him immediately. The timing wasn't coincidence. Martin had learned Caleb was back, and less than 24 hours later, someone was trying to remove Elaine from the only place she had left. Caleb folded the notice carefully. His anger felt different now. Colder, more focused. "I'm not letting this happen." Elaine studied him. For a moment neither spoke. Then she stood and walked toward a shelf near the back wall. From behind several old books and a rusted lantern, she pulled out a coffee tin. The metal container looked ordinary, almost worthless, yet she handled it with extraordinary care. She placed it on the table between them. "Before you decide that," she said quietly, "you need to see something." The lid creaked when she opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Neatly stacked, tied together with fading string. Caleb stared. Every single envelope carried the same handwriting, Elaine's, and every one of them was addressed to him. His name, his Singapore address. Year after year, unopened, unsent. Elaine's voice broke. "I wrote whenever I missed you." Caleb slowly reached for the top envelope. The date in the corner stopped him cold. It was from 7 years ago. Beneath it sat another, and another, and another. A decade of letters that had never reached him. Then he noticed something even stranger. One envelope near the bottom looked different, older, official. A law firm's return address appeared in the corner, and across the front, in black ink, someone had written a single word. Caleb looked up. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "That's the one Martin never wanted anyone to read." Caleb stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. The paper had yellowed with age. The corners were worn. A dark crease ran across the middle as though someone had folded and unfolded it many times over the years. Hold. The word seemed almost deliberate. Not delivered, not returned, held, kept from someone, kept from him. "When did you find this?" Caleb asked. Elaine sat down slowly on the cot. "About 4 years ago." "You never opened it?" She shook her head. "It wasn't addressed to me." Caleb looked at her. "Mom, you've been protecting this for 4 years?" "I didn't know what it meant." The answer sounded honest. That was the thing about Elaine. She never exaggerated, never dramatized, she simply endured. Caleb carefully slid a finger beneath the flap. The old adhesive gave way easily. Inside was a single folded letter on law office stationery. The name at the top immediately caught his attention. Marshall and Green Attorneys at Law. The firm's address was local. Still operating, still in town. His pulse quickened. He unfolded the page. Most of the letter consisted of legal language. References to estate documents, probate proceedings, administrative notices. Then one paragraph made him stop reading. His eyes moved over the same sentence twice, then a third time. "What is it?" Elaine asked. Caleb looked up. "This was sent after Dad died." Elaine nodded. "I figured that much." The letter referenced a requested meeting regarding estate amendments and supplemental documentation related to property distribution. Caleb frowned. Estate amendments. Supplemental documentation. Neither phrase sounded familiar. He had participated in several phone calls after his father's death years ago. Martin had assured him everything was settled, simple, routine, nothing unusual. Apparently that wasn't true. "There was supposed to be a meeting," Caleb said. "A meeting? At the law office?" Elaine leaned forward. "When?" Caleb checked the date again. The answer made both of them fall silent. 2 weeks after his father's funeral. A meeting Caleb had never attended. A meeting he had never even known existed. The realization hit like a punch. Someone hadn't forgotten to tell him. Someone had made sure he never knew. Outside, wind rattled the hut walls. Inside, the silence deepened. Finally, Elaine spoke. "Your father met with a lawyer shortly before he passed." Caleb looked up. "You never told me that." "Because I didn't think it mattered." She paused, then added quietly, "Martin was angry afterward. That got his attention." "Angry how?" Elaine stared toward the small window. He wouldn't speak to his father for days. Caleb felt another piece of the puzzle shift. Not enough to reveal the picture. Enough to change its shape. What were they fighting about? "I never knew." "You never asked?" Elaine gave a sad smile. They were both stubborn men. That sounded believable. The problem was that too many believable things were beginning to point in the same direction. Caleb folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. This time he wasn't putting it back into the coffee tin. Instead, he placed it carefully inside his backpack. The movement didn't go unnoticed. Elaine watched him. "What are you doing?" "I'm keeping it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Martin won't like that." Caleb looked at her. "For the first time in years, I don't care what Martin likes." Something changed in Elaine's expression. Not relief, not exactly hope. A cautious, fragile hope, as though she was seeing a version of her son she had been waiting years to meet. Later that afternoon, Caleb drove into town again. This time he wasn't looking for Martin. He wanted facts. Facts couldn't be intimidated. Facts couldn't rewrite themselves. At least that was what he hoped. Marshall and Green occupied a brick building near the courthouse square. The office looked older than he remembered. The brass sign outside showed signs of wear. But the firm was still operating. A receptionist greeted him politely. When Caleb introduced himself, her expression shifted. Recognition, then curiosity. "One moment, please." A few minutes later, a woman in her early 50s appeared from a hallway, professional, composed, sharp-eyed. "I'm Rebecca Green." Caleb stood. "Whitaker." "I know." That answer surprised him. She gestured toward her office. "Please come in." The office walls were lined with legal books and framed certificates. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive, just decades of work. Rebecca sat across from him. "I assume this is about your father." Caleb immediately leaned forward. "You knew him?" "I knew everyone involved." That wasn't the answer he expected. Rebecca folded her hands. "My father handled your family's estate." Caleb felt his pulse quicken again. The family estate, exactly where this trail seemed to lead. He removed the envelope from his backpack and placed it on the desk. Rebecca stared at it. Her expression changed instantly, not dramatically, but enough. "You've seen this before," Caleb said. It wasn't a question, no. She paused. "Not this copy. The word landed heavily. "What does that mean?" Rebecca leaned back. For several seconds she appeared to be choosing her words carefully. Finally she opened a desk drawer and removed an old file index ledger. Not a case file, just a record book. Names, dates, references. She flipped through several pages, then stopped. Her finger rested on an entry, "Whitaker." Caleb watched her read, then watched her frown. "What?" Rebecca looked up slowly. There was an amendment. His heart skipped. "To what?" "Your father's estate documents." Every muscle in Caleb's body tightened. "What kind of amendment?" Rebecca closed the ledger. "I can't answer that without reviewing the archived file." "Then review it." A brief silence followed. Then Rebecca said something unexpected. "That's the problem." Caleb stared at her. "What problem?" "The archive reference exists." She tapped the ledger. "The file doesn't." For several seconds, neither spoke. Caleb struggled to process what he'd heard. The record existed. The file did not. A paper trail leading towards something that had disappeared. Not lost. Removed. Rebecca seemed to reach the same conclusion. "That's highly unusual." "How unusual?" "Very." Caleb stood. His heartbeat had become impossible to ignore. Someone had hidden a meeting. Someone had intercepted letters. Someone had moved Elaine out of her home. And now a legal file connected to his father's estate was missing. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Rebecca opened the ledger once more. Her eyes moved across the entry again. Then she froze. A second later she turned the book toward him. "Mr. Whitaker." Her voice had changed. "What?" She pointed to a handwritten notation beneath the archive number. A notation she hadn't noticed before. 4 words, small, almost hidden, written in faded blue ink. "Witness present, separate statement recorded." Caleb felt a chill move down his spine. He looked up. Rebecca was staring at him. "If that note is accurate," she said quietly, "there may be someone alive who heard exactly what your father wanted." And suddenly the missing file wasn't the biggest mystery anymore. The drive back from the law office felt longer than it should have. Caleb kept replaying Rebecca Green's words in his head. Witness present, separate statement recorded. For the first time since returning to Maine, he had something concrete. Not proof, not enough for a court, but enough to know he wasn't chasing ghosts. Someone had heard his father speak. Someone knew what had happened before the estate documents disappeared. The question was whether that person was still alive and willing to talk. When he reached the fishing hut, Elaine was sitting outside with a blanket around her shoulders. The afternoon air had cooled, and fog was beginning to drift in from the harbor. She looked up immediately. "You found something." It wasn't a question. Caleb sat beside her. "A witness." Elaine frowned. "A witness to what?" "Whatever Dad changed before he died." For a moment, neither spoke. The waves rolled softly against the distant docks. Then Elaine's eyes narrowed, almost as if she was searching through memories she had buried years ago. There was someone. Caleb turned toward her. "Who?" "I don't know if it matters." "It matters." She looked uncertain. Your father used to go fishing with him. That description fit half the town. Caleb waited. Eventually she sighed. Elias Ward. The name meant nothing to him, but the reaction it produced in Elaine did. Her shoulders tightened, not fear, regret. You remember him? He and your father were close. Close enough to witness legal documents? I don't know. Another silence. Then Elaine quietly added something that made Caleb pay attention. Martin hated him. That wasn't something she said casually. Martin rarely hated anyone openly. He preferred control, influence, polite pressure. Hatred suggested something different, a threat. Why? Elaine stared toward the water. Because Elias told the truth even when it was inconvenient. The answer stayed with Caleb. An hour later he was driving again. This time toward a weathered house overlooking a rocky section of coastline several miles outside town. Rebecca had helped him locate the address. Retired fisherman, 68 years old, widower, minimal public records, few local connections, a man who seemed to have quietly disappeared from community life. The house reflected that, paint peeling, porch sagging slightly, an old pickup truck parked beside a shed. Nothing about the property suggested wealth, nothing suggested power. The front door opened before Caleb reached the steps. A tall, gray-haired man stood there. Even in retirement he looked strong, weathered by decades of working on the water. His expression hardened the moment Caleb introduced himself. Whitaker. Not a greeting, an observation. Caleb nodded. Elias Ward, I know who you are. That wasn't encouraging. Can we talk? No. The answer came instantly. Elias started closing the door. Caleb stopped it, not aggressively. Just enough. My father trusted you. For the first time, something flickered across the older man's face. Guilt. Then it vanished. Go home, you were there. Elias froze, only for a second, but Caleb saw it, and that second changed everything. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The older man stepped outside and shut the door behind him. His eyes moved toward the road, then toward the neighboring properties, checking, watching, making sure nobody was listening. Interesting. Very interesting. What did Rebecca tell you? Not much. Then leave it alone. I'm not leaving anything alone. Elias let out a tired breath. You should. Why? The older man's expression darkened. Because people get hurt. Caleb almost laughed. My mother is living in a fishing hut. That landed hard. For several seconds Elias didn't respond, then he looked away. The reaction was small, but unmistakable. Shame. Did Martin know? Caleb asked. Still no answer. Did he know she was living there? Silence. Caleb pressed harder. Did he know she lost the house? The silence stretched longer. Finally Elias spoke. Everybody knew. The words hit like a punch. Everybody knew. The town knew. The harbor knew. The people who smiled at Martin knew. The realization left a bitter taste in Caleb's mouth. Nobody had called. Nobody had written. Nobody had told him. Why? Elias rubbed a hand across his face. Because people mind their own business. No. Caleb shook his head. That's not the same thing. The older man looked exhausted. Not defensive, not angry. Just tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying something too long. You don't understand. Then explain it. A long pause followed. Finally Elias looked directly at him. Your father knew. The words stopped Caleb cold. What? He knew Martin couldn't be trusted. The world seemed to narrow around those words. What are you saying? I'm saying your father wasn't surprised. Elias's voice had become quiet, measured, careful. As far as he was concerned, Martin always wanted control. Caleb felt his heartbeat accelerate. Control of what? The marina. That's it? Elias gave a humorless laugh. No, another pause. Then the family. Something about the way he said it made Caleb uncomfortable, because it sounded less like a theory and more like a memory. You were there, weren't you? Elias didn't answer immediately, but this time he didn't deny it. Caleb saw the truth before the words arrived. You heard my father. The older man closed his eyes. For a moment he looked much older than 68. When he opened them again, the fight seemed gone. Yes, Caleb's pulse surged. The answer felt enormous. Years of confusion, years of questions, and finally someone was admitting it. What did he say? Elias looked toward the ocean. The wind moved through the grass between them. He wanted your mother protected. Caleb nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like his father. What else? Silence. Then Elias said something that changed everything. He wanted you protected too. Caleb frowned. Protected from what? The older man stared at him, not at his face. At something deeper, something older, something he seemed to have been carrying for years. Finally Elias spoke. Martin wasn't angry because of the money. Caleb felt a chill crawl through him. Then why was he angry? Elias swallowed. For the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of Caleb, afraid of the answer. Afraid of finally saying it out loud, because once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. It wasn't the marina. His voice dropped lower. It wasn't the house. Caleb stepped closer. Then what was it? Elias looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, he gave a glimpse of the secret buried underneath everything. Your father changed something about who would legally carry the Whitaker name. Then Elias turned away, as if he had already said too much. Kep stood frozen for a moment after Elias turned away. The wind coming off the ocean felt colder now, not because the temperature had changed, because the ground beneath everything he believed about his family was beginning to shift. Wait. Elias stopped but didn't turn around. What did that mean? No answer. What did my father change? Still nothing. Caleb stepped forward. You don't get to say something like that and walk away. For several seconds, the older man remained motionless. Then he slowly faced him again. His expression carried something Caleb hadn't seen before. Regret, deep regret. The problem is that I already did. Caleb frowned. What? I walked away years ago. The words hung heavily between them. Elias rubbed a hand across his face. I should have spoken sooner than speak now. A bitter laugh escaped him. You think it's that simple? No, I think my mother lost her home. That landed again. Every conversation seemed to come back to Elaine. Every buried secret, every missing document, every suspicious decision. Eventually they all pointed toward the same victim. Elias looked toward the horizon. I signed something. Caleb's stomach tightened. What did you sign? A statement. About what? The older man's jaw clenched. About your mother leaving the cottage voluntarily. The words hit hard. For a second, Caleb genuinely thought he had misheard. You signed that? Elias nodded. Slowly, painfully. I did. Why? I was told it was true. By Martin. It wasn't a question. Again, Elias nodded. The silence that followed felt enormous. Caleb stared at him. This wasn't just a witness anymore. This was someone who had helped make the situation possible. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe not maliciously. But it happened anyway. Elias seemed to understand exactly what Caleb was thinking. I never saw the papers. You signed them. I know. You didn't verify anything? I trusted him. Caleb laughed once, a short, humorless sound. So did I. That answer seemed to hurt Elias more than the accusation. For the first time, Caleb realized the older man wasn't protecting Martin anymore. He was struggling to live with himself. I didn't know she'd end up behind that marina. His voice cracked slightly. I swear to you, I didn't know. Caleb wanted to stay angry. Part of him succeeded. Part of him couldn't. Because the remorse looked genuine. And because this wasn't really about Elias. This was about the man who had convinced everyone else to look away. What happened after you signed? Elias hesitated. Then he motioned toward the porch. Sit down. They sat across from each other in two weathered chairs. The ocean spread behind them, gray, endless, restless, much like the conversation itself. Your father met with the lawyer 6 weeks before he died. Finally, something concrete. Caleb leaned forward. What happened? I wasn't inside the office. Then how do you know? Because he told me afterward. The answer made sense. Elias had been his fishing partner for nearly 30 years. Some friendships reached a point where conversations happened without explanation, without caution, without filters. He was worried. About Martin, among other things. The older man stared at the water. He kept saying that responsibility and entitlement aren't the same thing. Caleb felt something stir in his memory. It sounded exactly like his father. The kind of thing he'd say during long conversations at the harbor. The kind of lesson nobody appreciated until years later. What did he mean? I think he meant Martin believed being the oldest automatically made him the owner of everything. The answer felt believable, too believable, and Dad disagreed. Strongly. Another silence followed. Then Elias added something unexpected. Your father wasn't trying to punish Martin. That caught Caleb off guard. He wasn't, no. The older man shook his head. He was trying to protect someone. The same phrase again. Protect. His mother. Himself. Someone else? Caleb couldn't tell anymore. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. What exactly did he change? Elias looked uncomfortable. That's where things get complicated. They already are. A faint smile appeared, the first one all afternoon. Fair point. Then it vanished. He never showed me the documents. Caleb's shoulders dropped slightly. But he told me enough to understand why Martin was furious. Hope returned immediately. What did he tell you? The older man took a long breath. When someone dies, people focus on money. Caleb nodded. Property, wealth, the marina, exactly. Elias leaned forward. But that's not what upset Martin, the same statement, now repeated, more deliberate, more certain. What upset him? The older man studied Caleb's face carefully, as though looking for something, a resemblance, a detail, a memory. Finally he answered. Recognition. The word caught Caleb off guard. Recognition? That's what your father called it. The confusion only deepened. Recognition of what? Recognition by whom? Nothing made sense. Yet, Elias noticed his frustration. I know how that sounds. No, you don't. The older man almost smiled. You're right, a gull cried overhead. The sound echoed across the water. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then Caleb made a decision. He pulled out his phone. What are you doing? I'm documenting everything. Elias frowned. Everything? Every conversation, every lead, every witness, every document. For the first time since returning home, Caleb felt himself becoming active instead of reactive. No more waiting. No more trusting Martin's version of events. No more assuming the truth would reveal itself. He would build it piece by piece if he had to. Elias watched him quietly. Then he nodded. Good, the response surprised Caleb. Good? You'll need records. Something about the way he said it made Caleb pause. You think this is going to get worse? The older man didn't answer immediately. That alone was answer enough. Finally he said, Martin doesn't lose control gracefully. A chill moved through Caleb, because he believed it. By the time he left, the sun was already beginning to set. Halfway back to town, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca Green. He answered immediately. Rebecca? Her voice sounded tense. Not panicked, but urgent. Where are you? Driving. I need you to come by the office. Caleb gripped the steering wheel tighter.
Why?
A brief silence. Then I found something in an archived index. His pulse jumped. What kind of something? Another pause, longer this time, as though she wasn't sure how to explain it. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Caleb, the missing estate file wasn't the only thing removed. The road ahead suddenly felt much darker. What else is missing? Rebecca exhaled slowly. There's a hospital record reference connected to your family. Caleb's heart skipped. A hospital record? Yes. What does it have to do with the estate? Silence. Then words that followed him all the way to town. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. Caleb arrived at Rebecca Green's office less than 20 minutes later. The courthouse square was nearly empty. Most businesses had closed for the evening. Only a few lights remained on inside the law office. Rebecca was waiting for him. She didn't waste time with greetings. The moment he stepped inside, she led him toward a conference room and closed the door behind them. A folder sat on the table. Thin, worn, old. Not the missing estate file. Something else. Caleb sat down. What did you find? Rebecca remained standing. I found references. His stomach tightened. References to what? She opened the folder carefully. Hospital records. The words sounded strange every time he heard them. Nothing about a hospital should have connected to his father's estate. Yet somehow it did. Rebecca slid several photocopied pages across the table. They aren't medical records. Caleb looked down. Administrative documents, archive logs, cross-reference requests, nothing revealing, at least not immediately. I don't understand. I didn't either. Rebecca pulled out a yellow legal pad covered with handwritten notes. That's why I kept digging. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, traffic moved faintly through the town square. Inside, every word seemed louder. There was a request made shortly after your father's final estate amendments. Caleb leaned forward. By who? I don't know. Not the answer he wanted. But the request specifically referenced a sealed hospital file connected to the Whitaker family. His pulse quickened. Sealed for what reason? Privacy protection. Rebecca paused. Which is normal. The pause suggested the next part wasn't. What isn't normal? The file reference was removed from the archive system. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Another missing record. Another disappearance. Another piece of evidence somebody apparently didn't want found. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Can records like that just vanish? Rebecca hesitated. No. Then how? Usually through administrative error. Usually. She met his eyes, and sometimes because someone knows exactly where to look. Neither said Martin's name, neither needed to. The silence filled the space instead. Rebecca sat across from him. There's more. Of course there was. There was always more. Every answer seemed to uncover a deeper layer. What? She opened another page. This hospital reference was connected to an amendment request. The words landed immediately. Amendment. The same word from the estate documents. The same word from the missing file. The same word that kept appearing whenever his father's final wishes entered the story. What kind of amendment? Rebecca shook her head. I don't know. The frustration hit Caleb immediately. Every lead stopped one step short of certainty. Every discovery pointed somewhere without arriving. Yet something had changed. For the first time, the hospital records and the estate records appeared connected. Not separately missing, connected. That mattered. A lot. Because it suggested intention. A plan. A motive. What exactly are we talking about here? Caleb asked. Rebecca folded her hands. There are few possibilities. I want facts. So do I. The answer softened his frustration slightly. She wasn't hiding anything. She simply didn't know. Not yet. We need access to the original documentation. Can we get it? Possibly. The word carried more hope than certainty. Caleb sat back. His thoughts immediately shifted toward Elaine. 7 days. That was all she had before enforcement removed her from the fishing hut. 7 days before whatever evidence remained might be scattered or lost. 7 days before Martin gained another victory. The timeline was tightening. Rebecca noticed the shift. You're worried about your mother? Yes, you should be. Not because she was in danger. Because she was vulnerable. And vulnerable people often lost ground while everyone else argued over paperwork. That realization hardened something inside him. For years he had trusted the system. Trusted family. Trusted distance. None of those things had protected Elaine, so he would. The decision felt simple. Almost obvious. After leaving the office, Caleb drove directly to the marina. The fog had thickened. The fishing hut appeared as little more than a shadow beside the abandoned buildings. A single lantern glowed inside. When he opened the door, Elaine looked up immediately. She could always read his face. You found something else? Caleb nodded. Maybe. That answer made her smile sadly. That's what you've been saying for 3 days. He couldn't argue. The entire investigation felt like chasing smoke. But it was smoke coming from somewhere, and eventually he would find the fire. Elaine listened quietly as he explained what Rebecca had discovered. The missing records, the hospital connection, the amendment references. At first she seemed confused. Then something changed, not dramatically, a flicker, a memory, small but unmistakable. Caleb noticed immediately. What is it? She looked away. Nothing. Mom. Her eyes remained fixed on the wall. The silence stretched. Then she slowly stood and crossed toward the tackle box. The same one that had started everything. She opened it. Moved aside several envelopes, a few photographs, old receipts. Then she stopped. Her hands trembled slightly. Maybe it doesn't matter. The statement guaranteed it mattered. Caleb waited. Eventually she pulled out a folded document. Not a letter, not a legal form, something else. The paper looked decades old. The edges had yellowed. The ink had faded. She stared at it for several seconds before handing it over. What is this? Elaine swallowed. I found it after your father died. Caleb unfolded it carefully. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. Hospital registration, an archive copy. Partial. Incomplete. But unmistakably official. His heartbeat accelerated. The document contained several names, dates, reference numbers, and one handwritten note in the margin. A note that had clearly been added years later. Caleb read it once. Then again, his confusion deepened. What does this mean? Elaine looked exhausted. I don't know, but she sounded uncertain, as if she knew more than she wanted to admit. What aren't you telling me? The question lingered. For a moment he thought she might finally answer. Instead she sat down slowly. Her shoulders seemed smaller than before, older, heavier. Your father wanted to tell you. Caleb froze. The room suddenly felt much colder. What? He wanted to explain everything, himself. His pulse pounded in his ears. Explain what? Elaine's eyes filled with tears. Not panic, not fear. Something closer to shame or grief, maybe both. She looked at the hospital paper, then back at him, and when she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. The reason Martin hated those estate changes wasn't because of money. Caleb felt the floor disappear beneath him. Elaine closed her eyes, as though saying the next words hurt. It was because those papers threatened a secret he spent years protecting. Then she pointed toward a name written near the bottom of the hospital record. a name Caleb had somehow overlooked. When he looked down again, his breath caught, because the surname wasn't Whitaker, and yet somehow it was connected to him. Caleb stared at the unfamiliar surname for several long seconds. The fishing hut seemed to shrink around him. The lantern hummed softly. Outside, waves struck the harbor pilings. Inside, nothing moved. "What is this name?" Elaine didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the paper, as if she had spent years trying not to look at it. Finally, she spoke. "Someone your father never wanted used against you." Caleb looked back at the document. The surname meant nothing. No memory, no connection, no explanation. Just another mystery. Who is this person? I don't know if the person matters anymore. The answer frustrated him instantly. Then why does the name matter? Elaine closed her eyes. Because Martin thought it mattered. That got his attention. Everything seemed to circle back to Martin. Not just money, not just property, not just inheritance, identity, reputation, control, things that couldn't be measured in dollars. Caleb sat down across from her. "What aren't you telling me?" She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying a secret too long. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That if you knew everything, you'd leave." The words hit harder than he expected. For a moment he forgot about documents, forgot about Martin, forgot about legal records. All he saw was his mother sitting inside a fishing hut after years of isolation, still worried about losing him. "Even now, I'm not leaving." Elaine smiled sadly. "That's easy to say now." Caleb looked away, because part of him understood. 9 years abroad, countless missed holidays, phone calls replacing visits, money replacing presence. He had never abandoned her intentionally, but intentions didn't change reality. Before he could respond, headlights swept across the hut. Both of them froze. A vehicle had pulled into the marina lot. The engine remained running. Elaine's expression changed immediately. Fear, not panic, recognition, Caleb noticed. "Who is it?" She stood, crossed to the small window, looked through the curtain, then stepped back. "It's him." Caleb was already moving. Martin, it had to be. He opened the door and stepped outside. A black SUV sat near the entrance road. Martin stood beside it, alone, no Serena, no employees, no witnesses, just him. The sight surprised Caleb. Martin usually preferred audiences. He liked appearing reasonable, professional, respected. Tonight felt different. Martin looked angry, not loud, not explosive, controlled anger, the dangerous kind. He waited until Caleb approached, then he spoke. "You've been busy." No greeting, no pretense. Caleb stopped several feet away. "So have you." The harbor wind moved between them. Neither smiled, neither blinked. For the first time since Caleb returned, there was no performance, just two brothers standing in the dark. "What do you want?" Caleb asked. Martin's eyes moved briefly toward the fishing hut. "I came for Mom." "No." The answer came immediately. Martin's jaw tightened. "She doesn't belong here." That almost made Caleb laugh. "That's interesting coming from you." A flash of irritation crossed Martin's face. Gone almost instantly. "You don't understand what's happening." "Then explain it." Martin shook his head. "Not here." "No." Caleb folded his arms. "You can say it here." The older man stared at him for several seconds. Then his voice dropped lower. "You've started digging into things that don't concern you." That sentence revealed more than Martin intended. Caleb recognized it immediately. Not concern, fear. For the first time, Martin sounded worried. "What exactly am I getting close to?" No answer. Instead, Martin took a step forward. "You should go back to Singapore." Caleb almost laughed again. There it was, the real request. Leave, disappear, trust Martin to handle everything, just like before, not happening. The silence that followed felt sharp, dangerous. Then Martin said something unexpected. "You think you're protecting her?" Caleb glanced toward the fishing hut. "I am." Martin shook his head slowly. "No." The certainty in his voice felt strange, almost sincere. For a moment Caleb wondered if there was something he still didn't understand, something hidden beneath all the lies. Then Martin ruined it. "You always make things worse." The statement instantly reminded Caleb why he couldn't trust him. Every problem became someone else's fault. Every betrayal became a misunderstanding. Every victim became responsible for their own suffering. "No," Caleb said quietly. "You did that." For the first time, Martin looked genuinely angry. The mask cracked. Only briefly, but Caleb saw it. Years of resentment hiding underneath. Years of jealousy. Years of entitlement. Then the mask returned. "You have no idea what Dad was trying to prevent." The words landed hard. Caleb's pulse quickened. What does that mean? Martin immediately realized his mistake. Too late. Caleb stepped closer. What was he trying to prevent? No answer. Tell me. The older man looked away toward the harbor. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Then he made a decision, a bad one. If you keep doing this, you'll destroy what's left of this family. Caleb stared at him. The statement felt almost absurd. Destroy. As though Elaine had destroyed herself. As though the missing documents had vanished naturally. As though the fishing hut wasn't standing 20 feet away. You already did that. Martin's face hardened. The conversation was over. Without another word, he turned toward the SUV, then stopped. One hand on the driver's door, back still facing Caleb. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Less confident, more personal. Ask Mom why Dad changed those records. Caleb froze. Martin opened the door. She knows more than she's telling you. The SUV pulled away seconds later. Its taillights disappeared into the fog, leaving Caleb standing alone. The words echoed inside his head. She knows more than she's telling you. Back inside the hut, Elaine was sitting exactly where he had left her. But her expression told him everything. She had heard enough. The silence between them stretched, long, heavy, painful. Finally Caleb sat down. Is he right? Elaine looked toward the floor. Not at him, not at the document, the floor. A place with no answers. Mom. Her hands trembled slightly. Is he right? The question seemed to hurt her, because this time she didn't deny it. A long breath escaped her, then another. Finally she stood, walked toward the tackle box, reached beneath a false wooden panel Caleb had never noticed before, and removed a small envelope, yellowed with age, sealed, untouched. She stared at it for several moments, then handed it to him. What is this? Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, from memory. It's the one thing I promised your father I'd never open. Caleb looked down at the envelope. Across the front, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Caleb Whitaker, open only if necessary, and suddenly both of them understood the same terrifying thing. Whatever was inside had finally become necessary. Caleb turned the envelope over in his hands. The paper felt fragile, years old, protected, hidden, waiting. For a moment neither he nor Elaine spoke. The fishing hut seemed suspended outside of time. Only the distant sound of water moving against the docks reminded him the world was still turning. Why didn't you tell me about this before? He asked quietly. Elaine's eyes never left the envelope. Because your father made me promise, and you kept that promise while everything else fell apart. A flash of pain crossed her face. Not anger, not guilt, pain. He believed the truth would only matter if someone tried to change it. Caleb frowned. What does that mean? I don't know. But this time she sounded uncertain, not evasive, just uncertain, as though even she had never fully understood why his father had left the letter. Eventually Caleb broke the seal. The paper inside crackled softly. There were only 2 pages, both handwritten. The first line stopped him immediately. If you are reading this, then someone has ignored my final instructions. Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken. He continued. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's, steady, deliberate, confident. The voice almost seemed alive again. The letter did not mention money. Not at first. It didn't mention the marina, or the cottage, or property. Instead it spoke about family, about responsibility, about mistakes, about how secrets became dangerous when people used them as weapons. Caleb read slowly. Every sentence felt important. Then he reached the section that changed everything. There are facts about our family that some people may someday use to divide those I love. Those facts do not change who belongs to this family. They never have. They never will. Caleb stopped, looked up. Elaine was watching him. Her eyes already knew what the next page contained. What was he talking about? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Keep reading. So he did. The second page contained specific instructions. Instructions apparently connected to legal documents. Instructions connected to records, instructions connected to a sealed file, but the details remained frustratingly incomplete. His father had clearly assumed the supporting documents would remain intact. He had never anticipated someone removing them. Then Caleb reached the final paragraph, and everything narrowed. If questions arise regarding Caleb's status, the supporting records held under attorney protection and hospital reference authorization will confirm the truth. Caleb stared. Status. Not inheritance, not property. Status. The word matched everything Elias had implied. Everything Martin feared, everything hidden inside the hospital references. He looked back at Elaine. What status? She closed her eyes. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she finally spoke. Martin spent years convincing people you didn't belong. The words landed heavily. What does that mean? He implied things. What things? Her voice trembled. That your father wasn't really your father. Silence filled the room. Not explosive silence, not shocking silence, a deeper kind. The kind created when scattered puzzle pieces suddenly begin moving toward each other. Caleb stared at her, then laughed once. A short sound. Disbelieving, that's ridiculous, yes. Nobody ever told me that. He was careful. Elaine folded her hands together. He never said it directly. Caleb's mind raced. Comments, awkward moments, things that never made sense before. People asking strange questions, certain relatives treating him differently. Martin insisting on phrases like family legacy and true Whitakers. At the time, Caleb had ignored it. Now those memories felt different, sharper, more intentional. You knew? I knew what Martin was doing. And you never told me. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought protecting you meant staying quiet. That answer hurt more than Caleb expected, because it sounded exactly like Elaine. A woman who survived problems by enduring them, not confronting them. A woman who spent years accepting suffering because she believed it protected other people. Outside, a truck passed somewhere beyond the marina. The sound faded quickly. Inside, the silence remained. Finally, Caleb folded the letter carefully. What actually happened? Elaine stared at the floor, then toward the hospital paper, then back at him. The truth is simpler than the lies. Those words felt important. Simple truths, complicated lies. That seemed to describe the entire situation. She took a slow breath. Years ago, there was confusion involving family records. What kind of confusion? Administrative records, hospital records, legal records, names, dates, things that should have been straightforward, but apparently weren't. Your father fixed it. Caleb frowned. When? Long before he died. That mattered. A lot. Because it meant whatever issue existed had already been resolved, legally, officially. Yet Martin continued using it. Why? Because the truth itself wasn't useful. The doubt was. Doubt isolated people. Doubt weakened claims. Doubt created leverage, and leverage created control. The realization made him angry, not at the secret, at the manipulation, at the years lost because someone benefited from confusion. Then another thought hit him. Hard. Wait. Elaine looked up. If Dad fixed it years ago, she nodded slowly. Then why was he changing estate documents before he died? For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That silence told Caleb something important. The identity issue wasn't the entire story. Not even close. It was part of it. A tool, a weapon, but not the real objective. Martin wanted something else, something bigger, something worth risking everything for. His phone suddenly vibrated. The sound startled both of them. A message from Rebecca. Caleb opened it immediately. The text contained only one sentence. Call me now. He stood at once. What happened? Elaine asked. I don't know, but his stomach already knew something had changed. He stepped outside and called. Rebecca answered before the first ring finished. Caleb. Her voice sounded strained, urgent. What happened? I found the backup archive. His pulse jumped. The estate file. No, a pause then. Something better. The fog drifted through the marina around him. The darkness felt heavier. What did you find? Rebecca exhaled. There was a secondary reference attached to the missing amendment. Caleb gripped the phone tighter. And another pause, long enough to make his heart pound. When she finally spoke, every word landed like a hammer. The amendment wasn't just protecting Elaine. Caleb stopped breathing. What do you mean? It specifically protected ownership rights to the waterfront property. The marina, the cottage, the land, everything. His pulse surged. Whose ownership rights? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice had become almost disbelieving. As far as this record shows, she paused. Your father intended part of the waterfront to pass directly to you. And suddenly Caleb understood why Martin had spent years trying to make him look like an outsider. The truth did not explode all at once. It arrived through documents, witness statements, bank records, archived references, the letter Caleb's father had hidden, the testimony Elias finally agreed to give, and the records Rebecca Green spent weeks helping uncover. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to deny. Martin had spent years controlling information. He had intercepted correspondence, managed accounts that were never truly his, used uncertainty surrounding old family records to weaken Caleb's standing in the family and isolate Elaine from anyone who might question him. Most importantly, he had concealed estate amendments that protected both Elaine's housing rights and Caleb's interest in part of the waterfront property. The legal process moved slowly. No dramatic courtroom confession arrived. No single document solved everything, but investigations began. Several accounts connected to the estate were frozen pending review. A planned marina investment deal collapsed after financial questions surfaced. Civil claims followed. People who had once admired Martin began asking difficult questions. For the first time in years, he could not control the story. Caleb saw him only once during those months. Across a courthouse hallway, Martin looked older, not defeated, not repentant, just tired. He started to speak, then stopped. Neither brother crossed the distance between them. Some wounds were not ready for conversation. Some might never be. Meanwhile, Elaine finally left the fishing hut. Not because someone forced her, because she chose to. That distinction mattered. A county housing program helped arrange temporary protected housing while the property disputes continued. The apartment was modest. Small kitchen, clean walls, a window overlooking a parking lot, nothing remarkable. Yet Caleb noticed something every time he visited. Elaine slept without fear. No more listening for vehicles outside. No more worrying about someone removing her belongings while she was gone. No more hiding documents inside tackle boxes and coffee tins. For the first time in years, she lived somewhere she was allowed to exist. One afternoon, Caleb drove her back to the harbor. The fishing hut still stood, weathered, crooked, stubborn, the same way she had been. She walked through it slowly, touching the walls, the shelf, the old cot, the tiny window. There were no tears, just quiet reflection. When she reached the door, she stopped. Her hand rested on the rusted latch. "I want this." Caleb looked at her. "The latch?" She nodded. "People will think that's strange." A faint smile appeared. People thought living here was strange. Fair enough. He removed it carefully and wrapped it in an old towel. She carried it herself. Months later, when most of the legal questions had settled, Caleb showed her another property. A small cottage overlooking a protected section of shoreline. Nothing grand, nothing expensive, just solid, legal, safe. The ownership structure had been reviewed repeatedly to ensure nobody could quietly take it away. When they walked through it together, Caleb said very little. He had learned that lesson. This choice belonged to her, not him, not a lawyer, not a social worker, not Martin. Elaine opened every cabinet, checked every window, sat quietly in the living room, then stood near the front door for a long time. Finally she turned. "I like this one." Caleb smiled. "So do I." The move happened 2 weeks later. Friends from town helped. A few church volunteers. Rebecca stopped by. Even Elias came. No speeches, no ceremony. Just people carrying boxes. The way real life usually worked. Near sunset, Caleb carried the final box into the cottage. Inside was the framed photograph Elaine had protected through every loss, every move, every humiliation. The same photograph that had once lived inside a plastic bag, then a tackle box, then a fishing hut. Now it had a wall, a real wall. Elaine took the frame from his hands. For a moment she simply looked at it. Then she hung it herself. Nobody helped. Nobody directed her. The picture settled into place. Something inside the room changed, not because of the photograph, because of what it represented. Belonging, permanence, a future. Caleb stood beside her. Neither spoke for several moments. Eventually he broke the silence. "I thought sending money meant I was taking care of you." Elaine continued, looking at the photograph. "I know. It wasn't enough." "No, the answer wasn't cruel, just honest." Caleb nodded. Years ago he might have argued, defended himself, explained his career, his obligations, the distance. Now he simply accepted it. Money had helped, but presence mattered too, and he had been absent. "I'm sorry." Elaine looked at him. The apology settled quietly between them. No dramatic reconciliation followed, no instant healing. That would have felt false. Instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand. A small gesture, simple. "You came back." The words meant more than forgiveness, because forgiveness could be spoken. Trust had to be rebuilt, and she was giving him the chance. Outside, evening settled across the harbor. The last visitors departed. The cottage grew quiet, warm, still. Elaine walked to the front door. In one hand she carried the old fishing hut latch, a reminder of what she had survived, not what she wanted to return to. She placed it on a shelf near the entrance. Then she closed the new door, turned the lock, and stood there for a moment. Not because she was afraid, not because she expected someone to take this home away, but because after everything that had happened, the choice belonged to her. For the first time in a very long time, the door was hers to lock, and the life behind it was hers to live. If this story made you think of someone who deserved to be protected sooner, share your thoughts below, and stay with us for the next Family Echoes story.